Beyond BattleCreek is a place to celebrate all that God is doing here at BattleCreek Church, behind the scenes and right in front of our eyes. My name is Gage Johnson, and I've been given the calling of finding and sharing those amazing things that God is doing in our church. As we honor stories of people knowing God, finding freedom, discovering their purpose, and making a difference, my prayer is that you would rejoice alongside us and find your place in the bigger story of the gospel. This season on Beyond BattleCreek, we're celebrating 20 years of BattleCreek Church. Whether this is your first week or you've been with us the whole 20 years, you're part of our history. This season, you'll hear stories of people who've been part of BattleCreek from the very beginning and some that have been only around for a few years. But throughout each story, you can find the common thread of God unmistakably moving in people's lives across Tulsa. BattleCreek Church is your place to know God, find freedom, discover your purpose, and make a global difference. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Beyond BattleCreek podcast. I've got my dear friends, Cade and Mary Catherine Corbel here with me. And they're going to be sharing a little bit about their story and what that looks like, especially in community. And this is really, really close to home for me because we're in community together. We have been in community groups since 2020, January of 2020,
That's right.
which was a heck of a time to join a community group. I feel like we all got real close real fast in that time. But
Some in person, some over Zoom.
a lot of Zoom right there at the beginning. Which somehow is a really good way to get to know somebody. We saw her inside of everybody's house, which was fun. So besides just the host. But today, they're going to be sharing a little bit about their journey of getting pregnant and having a little girl that they have and what that's looked like. But where I really like to start with these stories is, what's y'all's love story? How did y'all meet each other? And how did you guys end up betrothed to each other?
Oh, man. We'll try not to take up the whole podcast with this. Late in life, getting married, I think, is just a good way to start it. We were both post 30 whenever we really got serious and knew that kind of these were each other that we wanted to get married to. I had actually, this is going to sound so superficial, but I had won a Salesman of the Year award through work, and I wasn't dating anybody at the time, and they needed me to take someone, and I vowed that I was not going to be that guy that took his brother or his mom on a salesman award trip. And I had noticed Mary Catherine on Facebook and what she was doing. She was working at a developmental center for kids with special needs in Atlanta, and someone who had done some very good marketing with a Phil Wickham song in the background just wooed me right in, and I was like, man, this is the kind of person I want to pursue. And we had gone to college together at the University of Arkansas, but that had been 7 to 8 years since we had last.
But you already knew her. It wasn't just you found this random lady on Facebook.
Right.
That makes me feel a little bit better about you, Kate.
No, he wasn't just scrolling.
I just found a lady on Facebook. And
hey, there you go, man.
No,
love
we were
is
good
love.
friends in college, but never dated.
Yeah, never dated. Just good mutual friends. But we literally had not talked in probably 7 to 8 years, and I reached out to her. She was in Atlanta. I was actually getting ready to go out there with some friends of mine for the SEC basketball tournament that year, and hit her up. And because remember, I had this motive in the back of my mind that I needed a date for this trip
that Mary Catherine had no idea.
She had no idea about. So the first time we went, as just friends, and did a lot of touristy things in Atlanta. I quickly asked for a repeat visit a couple weeks later,
which I thought was interesting because I thought he was just coming to see buddies for the SEC tournament. I'm like,
But I was ready to come back, and I did the second time, and so obviously showed a lot more intentionality. And there was a lot of God stories in there that we really don't have time for. But yeah, after that second time, I think we both kind of knew that there was something there, and she did go on the trip with me to Central America against the advice of a lot of her friends.
Yeah.
Everybody. But
what did you think about it, though, Mary Catherine?
About going on the trip?
Yeah.
I mean, I think when he asked me, I said, let me think about it. And I said I'd pray about it and get back to him. And then it ended up being the only week I was off in the whole year, like the whole school calendar, because we went by the school calendar in Georgia, where I was working. And so I had that week off, and I had one friend at work, Evan, who said, well, I think you should go. It's a free trip. You can go see a different part of the world you may never see. So anyway, yeah, I went against everybody but my friend Evan, and I went.
No fears of being murdered, though.
I mean, I had small fears because people were like telling me that, like, don't be,
You're going to end up on CNN.
right.
2020.
Yeah, I was a little worried, but not too worried.
Yeah, so we came back from that, and we were officially dating after that.
Our overseas trip.
She was in Atlanta. I was in Tulsa, so I became very familiar with Hartsfield-Jackson International. We dated for 9 months, and then we were engaged for 9 months.
Wow.
And then
We never lived in the same town until we
never
were
lived
married.
in the same town until we were
Man.
married.
Yeah, wouldn't advise that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was tough.
Yeah.
It was tough but sweet, at the same time. Obviously, it made the time that we were together. We cherished it, because
Sure.
we weren't just down the road from each other, and so it was sweet. We ended up getting married in a little town about 30 miles east of Atlanta called Roswell, Georgia, on an old it was an old plantation that was a new they turned it into like a hunting lodge, B&B.
Okay.
So it was beautiful. Just
Yeah.
beautiful Southern style wedding, and it was good. So that was in August of 2015.
So y'all been married 8 years in this
Coming up
August?
on 8. Coming
That's
up on 8,
awesome.
just ahead of y'all.
That's awesome. And Cade, you were already living in Tulsa right at that point. And so when y'all got married, you moved back to Tulsa.
Yeah, I was already in Tulsa. I had been here
Yeah, he was
for
here the
about
whole
4
time
years.
we dated.
Yeah,
Okay. And had you been a part of BattleCreek Church at that point for a
I
little
had.
bit? Okay.
I had. Yeah, I was in serving in youth.
Okay.
Was also in a singles community group.
Yeah.
That wasn't really producing the fruit that I was looking for. So I had to take my talents to Atlanta.
There you go.
But yeah, it was good. There was a guy that actually discipled me in college at the University of Arkansas, Todd Aaron, and he said whenever I moved to Tulsa, he kind of talks like a surfer dude, and he said, "Bro, there's only one church to go to in Tulsa," and at that time it was the church at BattleCreek, and so he said TCABC because that's what they used to call the church at BattleCreek, and so
Throwback.
yeah, that was when I started, and then when Mary Catherine came here, I didn't really give her a choice. Just said this is where we go to church,
Yeah.
pretty much. And so yeah, the rest is history. We've been at. Somebody was just asking me downstairs a minute ago. I think I've been involved with the church right around 12 years. So
Wow.
yeah,
So 12 out of 20. That's a pretty big chunk of time for sure.
Yep.
Man. So y'all got married a little later in life. I think that for a lot of people that means trying to start a family pretty quickly after that.
that's right.
Was that the case for y'all, or did y'all wait a little bit?
No, we talked a lot about that, I guess, like before we even got married, like making sure everybody was on the same page with wanting to have kids and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was pretty quickly into marriage that I would say within the first year of trying.
Yeah, we wanted to obviously get as much time with just us as we could, but we knew since we had waited so late in life that was kind of the sacrifice that we had made was, hey, now that we are married, we're going to have to move with this pretty quick. Just because we know that we all have biological clocks and things statistically work better on the early end of the clock as opposed to the later end of the clock with regards to having a family. And so we were trying to abide by those said rules or statistics and get the ball rolling. I would say within the first year and a half anyway.
Okay. And pretty early on, right, y'all found out that it wasn't going to be easy for you guys to have kids. What was that like to get that news, and what did it look like?
Well, so before we even knew we were going to need to do fertility testing on either one of us or kind of even go down that road, we had a series of miscarriages. And so I think, I mean, a lot of things come up, but I mean, that going through that is a pretty difficult journey. And then you add finding out, okay, actually, this is probably something you need to get yourself tested. We need to get Cade tested, and then we need to evaluate, like, is this going to be something that continues with your body? Do we need to actually look at doing specific fertility treatment? So they were kind of separate, but yeah, it's pretty devastating. You know, I think we had a pastor recently talk from the stage about their fertility journey, and I think he said something to the effect of, like, you feel inadequate. You
Wow.
do. You feel pretty, especially as a woman, you feel broken in a series of ways when you get that news.
Yeah, and then the miscarriages are just such a loss, right? Like it's not
Right.
even just the loss of the person,
Right.
the loss of the child, but the potential, right?
Right. Yeah. And then you add all of the, whether you've told people or not told people. So then you add the magnifying effect of like you're going through your own grief and loss, and then to have to like tell other people
Right.
and keep them updated, which, yeah, that's just a difficult piece of it as well. And then when we walked into the fertility journey, that was a hard part of trying to navigate it, of how much do we tell people or not tell people, because then if it fails again or I go through another miscarriage, I hated the part of having to follow up and be like, oh, never mind, we're not pregnant anymore, because it had just become such a, it happened a lot.
Yeah, I try to never place like severity of situation when you're talking about this, but some people find out that they're going to have infertility issues because they just can't ever get pregnant. For us, we seemingly didn't have issues getting pregnant. It was just that the viability of what was being created wasn't strong enough to hold on. And so for me, it almost seemed like that was harder because life had began and then life ended. Whereas if life can never begin, I don't know that that's easier. Obviously, anybody that's walking this journey has got their own struggles, but for us, it was just like Mary Catherine said, every time that something else started, it was like then we had to go back and tell everybody that it had ended again. And for us, that was the hardest part, because then, and we'll get to this here in a minute, but then that leads you to just wanting to isolate and not share anything with anybody. And
Because it's devastating each time on a different level.
And boy, the enemy can just really have a field day with that, because he wants you to put you on an island by yourself. He doesn't want you sharing this journey with the people around you. And we knew in our hearts that wasn't the right way to handle it. We needed to continue to share, but that was probably the biggest point of contention between the two of us through the entire thing. Was I wanted to continue to share, get it out. Mary Catherine got to a place where she was like, I don't want to tell anybody about anything that we're doing. And that's kind of where we got to.
Yeah, that is kind of part of my next question is, how does this start to affect just your life in general? Like we talk about infertility around, at least around here, as this journey that you walk on. And I think that that's an accurate picture, because it's not just like one part of your life, right? Like it's not just, oh, this small piece of me is experiencing this difficulty,
Right.
but it seemingly does impact a lot of what you're going through.
Right.
What was that like for you guys? Like, how did you see this infertility journey impacting your life?
I would say that it impacted every area of our life. It obviously impacts your marriage, but it impacted so I was having to go through, I'm a counselor, so I was having to go through, 16 and 17-year-old girls that I was working with at public schools that were getting pregnant and walking with them through that while we're going through all of our things. So it was hard at my job. It was hard at home because Cade and I were handling all of this very differently. And then we had a lot of family members and friends getting pregnant with their second and third child. And so that was hard with family. So it was kind of hard everywhere. We were also experiencing some anxiety, and so that was hard. Like it was all kind of around the same time.
That was a separate issue, right? Like the generalized anxiety.
Yeah, I would say a good way to describe it or kind of frame it is life goes on, right? And the rest of life didn't stop just because infertility fell into the middle of it. So everything else, that we had going on, just a couple little pieces of backstory. Mary Catherine was unable to get a job for the first couple years that she moved from Atlanta to here. There was some licensing issues that the state of Oklahoma, unfortunately, was very difficult to work with on. That was a weight in our life. We obviously were newlyweds. That was a big enough change as it was. And then about a month into our marriage, I just started dealing with just some crippling general anxiety just out of the blue that I'd never dealt with. The way I kind of described it to people was, man, I lived 30 years and never really had a bad day in my life. And then all of a sudden, here it is out of nowhere. We're 30 days into marriage, and I'm sure Mary Catherine's like, what in the world have I done? My husband can't even hardly get out the door and go to work. And so, yeah, so I mean, all of that is still going on. We had also another big trial that was in the middle of all that. I had a brother that went through a season of substance abuse, and we were the kind of the responsible family members that jumped in and helped take care of that. And so when you have something like infertility, all the other trials in your life are still going on, and it's just one more big log that gets added to the fire, I guess is the best way that I can put it. And it just it ratchets up the tension on everything else, right? And so it makes every little argument, every little disagreement, every little dispute seem all that more magnified, because you've got this inadequacy in the back of your mind that the enemy's just constantly just kind of peppering you with. And so I would just say it put a wet blanket on all the good stuff in life, and it turned up the gas and the heat on everything that was bad in life.
Wow, man. It's difficult to even, if you haven't walked through that, it's difficult to even imagine how tough that could possibly be. Right. How did it impact your relationship with the Lord? Like, I mean, I can only imagine in my difficult seasons, I've not walked through anything like this, but in my difficult seasons, like, it tends to go one of two ways with the Lord. Of like, I start to, blame him and curse him and, put the proverbial middle finger up in the air at him, or it draws me closer. And I'm sure it wasn't exclusively one or the other for you guys, but what did that look like for y'all?
I think it was different during different parts of this. And it did take us about 4 years to have Evocate. So definitely through Cade's anxiety and some of those really tough days, I do feel like I found something in me that I knew one of us had to cling to something to keep us afloat. But I would say, especially through the seasons of getting to 9 weeks or 10 weeks pregnant and then losing another baby, I mean, there were definite days I was angry and cursing God and just pissed. And so it was really hard sometimes to go to church and sing, "You are good," So I think, I don't know what you'd add to that, but I would say, it was different during different times of those years. What would you say about that?
I would say it had different effects on us. God in his goodness, I feel like, has drawn me closer to him through trials. And it's only by his grace that's been my reaction, because I know trials in life sometimes push people away from the Lord. But I'm grateful in this weird way, like even for my anxiety, because it just made me just push into the Lord even more. The infertility had a similar effect on me, but it didn't have the same effect on Mary Catherine. And so therein lies, again, another point of contention. You've got one part of the house that's like, man, crap's hitting the fan. We need to push into God even more. And the other person is like, heck with that. Like, why would we do that if, it's not helping, it's not working, whatever adjectives you want to add on to it. So I would just say it added even more contention, and not that like one of us was more holy or more spiritual during that season, but it was just one more thing that we were seeing things different on. Is probably the best way to put it.
That's really tough. Mm-hmm. What did like community look like in that season? Because I mean, obviously you guys are walking through just extreme difficulties with each other and with external factors, things like that. Right. But then you've also got the church aspect, and you're having a hard time going to church. And how do you deal with community? You've already touched a little bit on like keeping everybody up to date, like that, how much of a chore that can be. Right. How do you plug into a community in the middle of trial by fire?
Well, and I think that's huge. I mean, I really think that through all the years of infertility and miscarriage and loss and anxiety, and I mean, I do think community is a huge piece, because, yes, it was hard for me to share, and yes, I didn't want to keep everybody up to date weekly, but I was still set on like we still had a group and we still went to group, and so I would share bits and pieces, and so I know there was one time where I didn't go, and Cade went and told everybody, we had experienced another loss, but I think for me the most tangible piece of like when I think back through all of that and like what was impactful is just people that showed up.
Mm-hmm. And how did they show up? Like, what did that look like for y'all?
Just even if you don't know what to say, like bringing groceries and setting it on the porch, like I love you.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah, no, that's. I was just sitting here thinking the same thing because I know when we had talked about doing this podcast before, that was one of the things I wanted to make sure and mention today was when you have a friend or a community group member that is going through something of any sort of severity, just act, because that person doesn't know what to tell you to do for them.
Right.
And so while a text that says, "We're here for everything that you need," or
What
"Please
do you
let
need?
us know what we can do for you,"
Right.
that isn't helpful for that person during the time. And I'll never forget dear friends that literally would just come by and ring the doorbell. They had not texted us. They had not said they were coming. And the doorbell would just ring, and you go to the door, and they'd be driving off, and there'd just be 2 bags of pre-made groceries with flowers, with everything else. And so it was just action without like needing a lot of guidance. And that was big for me because I'd never done anything like that in my life. And so that's helped me now to know how to serve people that are in the middle of some sort of fire. Is asking someone what you can do for them isn't helpful. And so I think if there's one message that we want to put out there during this is like, hey, how can we be the hands and feet moving forward? Is just act first, right? And that was, we'll never forget those acts of love that people did for us during those seasons of life. It was incredible because there is nothing you can do, right? If there was something you could do, we would have hired it. We would have paid for it. We would have, right?
Well, and the person doesn't know, right? Like I don't know what I need.
That's
I
right.
am so falling apart. I am so sad. I am so broken. Like, so for you to say like, hey, I need, what do you need? Or, hey, can I, whatever. Or like I remember getting a lot of like, how are you? I'm like,
How do you think?
not great, not good at all, right? So I think just the action of just like someone sending a text or you walking out to get the mail and there's flowers on your porch, it would just bring me to tears like every time. And like you talking about faith, like those were the small reminders for me of like you're not overlooked, like you're still seen.
That's good.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I was just going to add to that was, because I know how big of proponents we are of community around here at BattleCreek, but zero clue how we would have made it through that season without our community group.
Right.
You have to remember, Mary Catherine had only been in Tulsa a couple years. A young woman in her early 30s moving halfway across the country and leaving every friend and social, touch point that she has behind. She's in a new city.
And you traveled 3 nights a week.
And I traveled 3 nights a week for work. And so it was those girls in that first community group that still to this day, they're Mary Catherine's best friends here in Tulsa. She still has her best friends around the country. But those girls from that community group are her most dear friends that are here. Those are her sisters that are here. And just speaking to, young couples that maybe are just joining this church, if there's one of you that knows that this is the thing you need to do and the other one is kind of kicking and screaming, like, force the issue and get in a community group as a young couple because you need it. Because that was hard for Mary Catherine when she first moved to Tulsa. She didn't want to go meet new people, and like she pushed back on that.
No.
I drug her to the first community group kicking and screaming, and I remember that night we left and she said, I really like those people. I think this is going to be big. And, here we are 8 years later, and those are still our dear friends in life.
Right. I think for me, one of the most difficult things when I think about, this process of infertility and within the church. Well, one is not spoken about very much in the
Right.
broad church. At BattleCreek, I feel like it gets brought up at a regular basis. It's not shied away from, but you start looking at the women in the Bible that deal with infertility, and God very clearly has an agenda of, I want babies to be born. When you read the scriptures, and then like we did recently at a night of prayer and worship, and I got to pray over more than one couple that was dealing with infertility, and just ask the Lord to give them a baby.
Wow.
Did y'all ever have a moment like that where you just went before the Lord and even asked somebody to pray over you? And what did that feel like if/when you did that?
Yeah, I feel like we had several
Mm-hmm.
times.
We have people in the house too.
Yeah, I can remember one specific instance where Chris and Julie Hislop came over to the house and anointed us both with oil and just prayed life over our house, and just spoke the desires of God over us, because we know God's heart. It's in His Word, and so that's no mystery. We know that it's God's intention for life to flourish, and but man, the enemy is so deceiving in the fact that he almost can make it seem in your minds like God has set Himself in opposition to what your heart wants.
Wow.
And that's just not true. And
What were some of those lies? If you remember.
yeah, man, I would just say that, like, your brokenness maybe is beyond repair, or, all of these, your inability to have a child is the result of X number of rebellious years in your life. I certainly spent a number of years not walking hand in hand with the Lord. And it brought about just a lot of sinful seasons in my life. And, every season of life is sinful, but there's a difference in a sinful season of life that is followed by repentance and contrition versus a sinful season of life that is just done in a spirit of rebellion. And I lived a long time like that. And so once I finally did start walking with the Lord, man, the enemy's like, well, the reason you can't have a baby is because, this is, like, in this weird way, it was almost like I was believing that it was punishment or something for this, for the ways that I'd lived. And I know that's a lie, but golly, the things that you start believing when what you want isn't coming through to fruition,
Yeah.
your mind can start to play tricks on you. So,
Oh yeah.
that was one that I remember specifically, but golly, I can just remember also so many breakthrough moments on worship nights, student camp, just other events at the church. And I feel like I'm an events person. Like, I love the events. I am the extrovert, and
Life of the party, man.
I like to get around people. And God doesn't need an event to heal you. But that's one of the reasons that I love our church so much, is because we have these open forums where people can come, sit in the presence of the Lord, and make a public statement of, I'm not okay. Because that's so countercultural to the world that we live in, is to admit brokenness. And our church gives us often an open forum to say that I'm not okay. And it can just be something as simple as Pastor Alex saying, hey, is there somebody in here today that would say I'm in the middle of a storm?
Right.
And just that simple thing gives somebody the opportunity just to stick their hand up in the air, and then somebody comes over, puts their arm around them, and that's the beginning of humility. That's the beginning of transparency, and that's the beginning of walls coming down, and that's the beginning of the end of the enemy's tactics, which is isolation. And so that's the beauty to us of the body, is taking that first step and admitting that I'm broken and I'm not meant to walk in this world alone.
Yeah, that's the seeds of community right there. I mean, we have formalized community groups and informal community groups, friend groups within the church, whatever. But as soon as somebody steps in and says, hey, you know what, I'm not all right.
Right.
I need help, and reaches out or reaches up and just says,
Yeah.
hey, come help, please.
Right.
That is community.
That's it.
And that's what we're about around here. And
Right.
that's, I mean, just like you said, like our pastors giving opportunities like that from stage and in counseling sessions and meetings, if you're on staff, those are the moments of transformation. That's when the Lord moves.
Right.
That's really, really
Amen.
powerful.
Right. I think it can be hard. So it's obviously not hard for Cade's personality because he loves the events and he loves the. But I do think, I mean, it also taught me, you do have to take the first step and be vulnerable, right? So you do have to raise your arm, or you do have to say, even if it's just right here in the three of us, and say, I'm not okay. But I think through some of those things, me being willing to say I'm not okay, or raise an arm, or go to somebody and ask for prayer, and then feeling totally different the next morning, or just at least some of the weight lifted off, kind of showed me to, like, all right, I've got to take one small step, but like this is worth it.
The other lie that I do remember, and this was probably, I'm going to speak for Mary Catherine here. She can correct me if I'm wrong, but the lie I think that she was told the most was that she was alone, and that she was the only person that had ever been through this, and that there was nobody else that was struggling with this. And that's just not true. Obviously, nobody wears infertility as a bumper sticker on their forehead, but there are people all throughout this church that have dealt with every kind of trial and storm and adversity possible, but you'll never meet them unless you share yours.
Sure.
And I think that's the big piece, is once we started sharing our journey of infertility, it's like, oh, they dealt with that. They dealt with that. They're dealing with that right now. Oh, I never knew that about them. And God just starts showing you these people that can either minister to you or be ministered by you. And then that's how the back and forth of the kingdom works. And so I think that was one way that, man, the enemy had a plan, but God's plan was greater in just the overarching theme of what he was trying to do.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what the Lord's done.
Yeah.
This is the fun part for me. And I'll readily admit that we entered into community group together formally. It was the first time I met you guys.
Yep.
And y'all were kind of on the back end of this journey. And it wasn't very long that I'd met you guys that you became pregnant with your little girl, that lovely, lovely little girl. And so tell me a little bit about how the Lord moved in y'all's life, because it's different for everybody, right? And I think
Right.
that the Lord, sometimes he just, works a miracle through opening somebody's womb, and, you couldn't get pregnant, you couldn't have a viable pregnancy. Okay, now it's going to happen. And it just takes one. And sometimes he moves through, IVF, or he moves through surrogacy or adoption. Like, the Lord moves in a lot of ways in this.
Right.
What did that look like for you guys?
Go ahead.
Well, so I guess after a series of the miscarriages, then we did end up doing testing on both of us, and there were a lot of other kind of pre-procedures that we asked about that are not as expensive and not as invasive on the woman's body, but they very quickly determined, after going through some things, that like IVF would be best for us. And would give us the best possible chance at me being able to carry a baby. So we went through a number of egg retrievals and shots and blood work and ultrasounds, and over the course of 4 rounds of IVF is what it took.
So spell it out a little bit more for me.
Okay.
I'm not super knowledgeable about this topic. How invasive is IVF? Like,
It's pretty invasive.
yeah, I mean, I think I remember, because you guys were undergoing treatments when we first met,
Right.
Or you were undergoing treatments. It's just
Right.
it's just for the woman, right? That
Yes.
undergoes treatment. And shots. I remember there being lots and lots of shots.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about it.
Yeah, so there are lots of shots. One of the other biggest pieces for us too was that our doctor was in St. Louis, and so over the course of all of this happening, we were having, I don't know, twice a year to get in the car, load me up, drive to St. Louis,
Whoa.
put me back in the car, drive me back, kind of thing. Because I mean, they sedate you for an egg
Oh,
retrieval,
wow.
so you're under anesthesia. I mean, it's a whole process to actually, like, you do this several weeks leading up of like the shots and the medicines and the hormones, and then it's all very timed, like down to the minute. And then so we would go to my doctor's office in St. Louis. They would sedate me. They would take the eggs out, and that was the egg retrieval process. And then you unite the egg and the sperm, and then it was this whole like waiting game. So yeah, it's a pretty. I mean, it's really hard on your body because your hormones are all over the place, and then they're adding in more hormones. But then also obviously the mental piece, and then it's just it's a bunch of layers. But yeah, I would say overall it's pretty invasive.
Sounds like it for sure.
Yeah, for us, we were fighting an uphill battle on both sides, for me and for Mary Catherine. And sometimes it's not the case. Sometimes it's an issue with the man. Sometimes it's an issue with the woman. For us, it was an issue with both.
Right.
And I think for Mary Catherine as well, being a more introverted, much more private person, and this doesn't even have to be for introverted or private people, but you're stripped of everything private about you. And you go from, that being an intimate, unknown piece of your life to, at the very least, a doctor and a staff of nurses knowing everything about you and everything that's broken about you, and in the most intimate ways. And so that was tough for Mary Catherine. I can always remember the thing that she would say the most was, I just wish we could do this the normal way, right? And
Wow.
so, because it almost it makes you feel sterile, kind of makes you feel like, it just goes back to that inadequacy. If I can't just do this normally, I gotta have this artificial help, right? And so, so that was a big piece for us. But yeah, just golly, I've probably given Mary Catherine no less than 300 shots over the last 5 years.
Gracious.
Because it's not like something you go to the doctor for. Over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, you're giving your wife 2 to 3 shots a day, and then at the end, those even ramp up, and you're giving these trigger shots to make her body do the things that you want it to do at the exact times that you want to do it, because you're trying to get these eggs at the perfect time, and then you're trying to fertilize at the perfect time, and so it's all out on the table, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that was really cool in all this, though, was that what they were basically trying to do is, since the statistics were so low for us to have natural intercourse and create a child, the science was, hey, we're going to go into you and get the best that you've got, and we're going to go into her and we're going to get the best that she's got, and we're going to create an embryo. And to which my question was, if you can be that specific about all of that and get exactly what you want, then why are we still having trouble 2, 3, 4 rounds into this? And our doctor, who's been doing this for 30 years, and he's one of the nation's leading infertility doctors, he very calmly looked at me and he said, there's a place where the science runs out and faith and the supernatural has to begin, because there are things that we can't explain. And to me, it was just God and his sovereignty even more telling us, I'm in control of this. Because what a better picture of the gospel and your relationship with God, of, right, there's 2 things and they're completely separate from one another, but when they come together, it's a whole new creation, right? And we hear that over and over in Scripture about a new creation being born. It's like, yeah, I can take this and it's perfect, and I can take this and it's perfect, but when I put them together, that's a whole new thing that has never been known before.
Wow.
And so that to me was mind-blowing, that here I have one of the most medically brilliant people basically saying that my intelligence has an end. And that's where my faith has to begin. And that, to me, it'll mark me forever. I'll always remember that.
And I felt like that was healing for us too.
Very healing.
Very healing for us to hear from him, because he's the one who's done this for so long, and we're still wading through new waters.
Aggravating and healing at the same time, right? Yeah. You're paying this guy for the answers, but you come to the end of this check that has a lot of zeros in it, and his answer is, I got all the answers up to about 95%. And so, yeah, it's God's sovereignty is at the end of every road we walk down in life.
Wow. Yeah. That's a great way to put that.
Yep.
IVF wasn't easy for y'all, right? And you kind of hinted at this earlier. There were multiple rounds, and what did that look like for the one that took the one? That's a good way to refer to Evangeline.
Yeah.
That little girl is the one that took.
Uh-huh.
What did that look like for you guys?
Go ahead.
We went, as we said before, we went through 3 to 4 rounds of this. And every time we would do one of these egg retrievals, the numbers were just getting worse. Every time. Like we would get less and less and
Meaning
less.
like less eggs.
We'd
were
get less
selected
eggs.
every time.
And then the gradings on any embryo that we could get created would be worse and worse and worse. And it was on the last one that we did. We went in and they did what they call a harvest or an egg retrieval, and then they fertilize them. They're in the lab. And then you just wait for these gut-wrenching phone calls that come in, right? And the phone rings. And
you wait for 14 days.
Wow.
While they watch and see if the embryo will mature.
And
That
then
is
the
a
phone
long
rings.
2
It
weeks.
is very long.
And it's a St. Louis phone number, and you could just immediately throw up because the nerves just jump into your throat. And I can remember this one was Mary Catherine's phone rang, and
I didn't want to answer.
she just started weeping and just handed it to me. And she said, I can't answer it, because we had decided financially and emotionally we couldn't do it anymore. Like we had invested financially about all that we could or were willing to put into it, and had decided that we were going to try an alternate route if this didn't work. And
I was done with it with my body too.
Yeah.
It was just been so many hormones
Right.
and shots, so we had decided this would be the last round.
And this was round 4 or 5?
This was
Yeah.
round
4.
4.
Yep.
After that egg retrieval, we decided that would be it.
and we answered the phone, and it was our clinician or our nurse that we worked hand in hand with, and she told us, and it was infinitely, completely more than anything we could have expected. And it basically was like the trend chart. If you can just imagine a trend chart, it went down, 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 and it had just basically hit the floor of 0. And then it just took a straight turn and went up. And basically we were told that we had numerous viable embryos. And so from there forward, then it was like, all right, let's start scheduling a transfer. And that was the beginning of what became our daughter. Because even once you get to that point, doesn't mean you're home free, right? People get viable embryos all the time in the IVF process. But then the woman's body is a whole nother issue, right? Is her womb prepared to grow a child? Is her body going to try to reject it? And so even though for us it was like we had met this checkpoint in the race, we knew that there was just still a long way to go, because even with this number of embryos that we got, I can still remember the doctor saying, he said, I think we should be able to get a baby out of this. And I was just like,
one baby. That's what
my
he said. He's
gracious. I'm like, are
a
you
baby.
kidding me? And so that obviously wasn't the case, though. For us, that was the turning point. The very first transfer worked. We actually kind of joke now. They actually flew our daughter's embryo down here from St. Louis, and then COVID happened, and they canceled the transfer, so they had to turn around and fly her embryo back to St. Louis.
Wow.
And we ended up waiting a couple more months, and then they flew her back down here. But that was the last time we ever went to St. Louis, because that doctor now, he had so many clients in the Tulsa area that he actually has an office here in Tulsa, and our daughter was one of the very first ones to ever be transferred here in Tulsa.
Wow.
And so it was really cool, and it worked, and it was great. And I'll let you pick it up from there.
No, I mean, it worked. We have her.
Yeah.
We have her.
She's great.
I'll remember when you told me we were at church. We were at the Broken Arrow campus, and just kind of passed me in the hallway. Hey man, I got something to tell you. And just the again, this is just a friend. This is from the outside, not even what y'all, but I jumped up and down and made a fool of myself right in front of everybody between services, and hugged on y'all, and I was so excited. And so, I mean, I can't even imagine the joy that y'all had in that moment of, this is really going to happen.
Yep.
And, the Lord providing.
There was one other thing, and I don't even think we talked about this in our pre-pod interview, but one of the ways that I feel like the Lord showed up the most, I'm not a super charismatic person, I would say. I was raised in a very conservative church, so when it comes to talking about, hey, the Lord spoke to me, certainly have never had many experiences in life where I felt like the Lord just sat down and spoke something to me. I do feel like that when it comes to our daughter and her name. And Mary Catherine had, we were in between the second and third miscarriage. And I remember it was early one morning. I was just up reading my Bible in the back room. Mary Catherine was in a very tough season. And I was listening to this Josh Garrels album. And this song came on. And I was like, this is weird. This song doesn't have any words. It was an instrumental piece. And I just felt like the Lord gave me this word of evangelism or evangeline or good news. And I was like, I like this song. And I click and I open up my phone. I'd never heard it before. And the name of this song was Evangeline. And so I just sat there and I start journaling and I start praying. And the Lord in that moment told me, this is going to end in good news. You're going to name your daughter after it.
Wow.
And it's going to be a little girl. And I sat on that story for like 2 months until I told Mary Catherine and I told her sister and her mom. I remember they were all over at her house. And and so they obviously all thought it was this beautiful story, but it would ended up being another 1.5 years before she would be here. But we did a traditional gender reveal. And to me, it was no surprise at all. I didn't need there to be a gender reveal. I knew we were having a daughter because I knew that the Lord had spoke that, and we knew what her name was going to be 1.5 years before we were ever even pregnant with her or had her. And so,
Tell them about the end of the song.
oh, and then at the end of that song, you could go listen to it. It's at the end of one of his albums. I can't remember the album title, but the song's Chrysalis or Chrysalis. At the end of the song, it just the music kind of just fades out. And it's just the sound of children laughing. And it's just this child laughter. I mean, I get chills even just thinking about it. But
It's specifically a little girl. At
yeah,
the end.
yeah,
Laughing.
there was just so much.
Yeah.
The Lord was just all over it. And so I would just say, if you're in the middle of something, it doesn't have to be infertility, but just get quiet and listen for the voice of God, and He'll speak to you. He'll let you know that He's in control. Ask for His affirmation over you and over your life and over what He's doing. And He's there. I promise you He's there. But even in the moments when He seems like He's not.
Oh, that's good. I think we're gonna have to end it there. I don't think I can top that.
Yeah.
Thank y'all so much for coming out and hanging out and having a conversation.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Beyond BattleCreek. If you liked what you heard today, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share so that we can continue to do projects like this. Thanks so much. See you next time.